For years, Vladimir Putin operated under a singular, unbreakable delusion. He was absolutely, fundamentally certain that he held all the cards in the Black Sea. He looked at those dark, turbulent waters and saw a Russian lake, an impregnable fortress of naval supremacy that would guarantee Moscow's dominance over Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and the Middle East for the rest of the 21st century. But then Turkey made a historic, calculated, and utterly ruthless move that paralyzed Moscow's entire grand strategy, sending shockwaves straight through the walls of the Kremlin. What we are about to unravel is not merely a routine military decision or a minor diplomatic shift. It is a monumental, historic turning point. It is the moment that, on the brutal, unforgiving chessboard of global hegemony where great empires have slaughtered each other for centuries, a new master emerged to hold the reins. To understand the sheer magnitude of what has just happened, you have to understand what the Black Sea actually is. To the untrained eye, it is just a body of water. But in the ruthless calculus of geopolitics, these dark waters are the center of the world. This is where the energy highways of the globe intersect. This is where the grain corridors that feed hundreds of millions of people are controlled. This is where the vital undersea data cables that connect continents lie hidden in the deep. Every single ripple in the Black Sea is part of a colossal geopolitical calculation. For centuries, tracing all the way back to the Tsars, Russia viewed this sea as its ultimate prize. It was the absolute key to their survival as a global superpower, providing their only reliable gateway to the warm waters of the Mediterranean and the oceans beyond. But on the Turkish front, looking north from Istanbul, the picture has always been crystal clear. The Black Sea and the straits that guard it are the ultimate, uncompromising red line of Turkish national security. Since the fuse of the Ukraine war was lit, the Black Sea has transformed into the most unpredictable, lethal, and consequential theater of modern military history. When Russian tanks rolled toward Kyiv, the world held its breath, and many expected Ankara to quietly sit on the sidelines, playing a passive game of wait and see. But Turkey never stood idly by as the balance of power spiraled out of control. Instead, Ankara played its cards with clinical precision to fundamentally alter the entire course of the war. Almost immediately, a massive arsenal of Turkish military hardware began pouring into Ukraine's defense lines like a devastating flood. We are talking about the legendary Bayraktar TB2 unmanned aerial vehicles, the terrifying TRLG-230 precision missile systems, heavy mortars, cutting-edge electronic warfare systems, and endless supplies of critical ammunition. This was not just token support. In the agonizing first weeks of the war, when miles-long Russian armored convoys were bearing down on the Ukrainian capital, it was the Turkish-made Bayraktar drones that prowled the skies above, raining down absolute hell. They shattered Russian supply lines, obliterated anti-air systems, and broke the back of the initial invasion. This immense military shield established on the blood-soaked battlefields of Ukraine was backed by an incredibly aggressive, unwavering stance in the diplomatic arena. Kiev was never left alone. The Turkish leadership looked Moscow dead in the eye and unapologetically recognized Crimea as sovereign Ukrainian territory. And then came the meetings that must have made the blood run cold in the halls of Russian intelligence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Istanbul to hold historic, closed-door meetings with the Turkish leadership. While the world watched with astonishment, the true fate of the war and the future of the Black Sea was being decided right there. Following these summits, announcements were made regarding maritime security, energy defense, and joint gas infrastructure projects. But all of that was just the appetizer. The real move, the one that dropped like a geopolitical bombshell right in the middle of this high-stakes diplomatic dance, was an announcement that changed everything.
Turkey officially announced that it had established a massive naval component command right in Istanbul. This command was created to manage a multinational naval force deployed directly into the Black Sea. The command center was stationed in Anadolu Kavagi, located in the Beykoz district of Istanbul. For an American audience looking at a map, you need to understand the strategic genius of this specific location. It sits on the very threshold of the gateway to the Black Sea, perched right at the northern exit of the Bosporus Strait. It is the ultimate choke point. Whoever controls this exact strip of land controls the destiny of entire nations. The core staff of this command consists entirely of elite Turkish military personnel, and its activation signaled a paradigm shift that Moscow was entirely powerless to stop. You might be asking why this facility, and the multinational force it commands, is such a lethal threat to Russian ambitions. To grasp this, we have to look at the command's mission statement, which reads like a nightmare for the Russian Navy. The scope of duties is vast and aggressive. They are tasked with ensuring absolute navigation safety, hunting down and eliminating the lethal sea mine threat, projecting military power to protect critical underwater infrastructure, and enforcing regional stability by the barrel of a gun. From the massive gas pipelines to the undersea internet cables, and from the energy transmission lines to the global commercial shipping lanes, every single strategic artery of the Black Sea now falls directly under the ironclad responsibility of this command.
This colossal structure is being established under the umbrella of the Ukraine Volunteer Coalition. 33 different nations have stepped forward to express their intention to participate, and 14 countries have announced their intention to deploy troops directly to the effort. But here is the brilliant, masterful stroke of Turkish diplomacy. While nations from all over the Western world are participating, all contributions involving actual naval ships and platforms will come exclusively from the 3 NATO countries that actually border the Black Sea: Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. Why is this detail so critical? Because it completely legally bypasses any Russian diplomatic protest by perfectly adhering to the Montreux Straits Convention, a treaty from 1936 that governs who can and cannot bring warships into the Black Sea. Turkey is playing the game by the rules, but using those very rules to strangle Russian maritime power. While an operational headquarters is being set up in Paris under the leadership of France and the United Kingdom, the actual real-world command of the naval component on the water has been directly assigned to Ankara. As the country with the absolute strongest, most advanced navy in the Black Sea, Turkey is assuming total regional dominance. Now let us dive deep into the true, devastating significance of this move for Vladimir Putin. Since the days of the Russian Tsars, Moscow's entire grand strategy, its very identity as a global empire, has been built on the absolute assumption that they own the Black Sea. Without the Black Sea, Russia is effectively landlocked and isolated. Access to the warm waters of the Mediterranean, the ability to project military power into the Middle East and Africa, the capacity to threaten southern Europe, all of it is entirely contingent upon Black Sea dominance. This imperial obsession was the exact reason Putin violently annexed Crimea back in 2014. He was terrified of losing the massive Russian naval base in Sevastopol. Russia's entire southern military strategy was built on the rock-solid assumption that nobody would ever dare challenge their control of these waters. The new naval command that Turkey has established in Istanbul has taken that Russian assumption, shattered it into a million pieces, and thrown it to the bottom of the sea, because for the first time in modern history, Russia is not just dealing with individual, weaker coastal states. They are facing a highly organized, heavily armed, multinational coordination mechanism right on their doorstep. This mechanism possesses the terrifying capacity to constrain, track, and block Russia's naval operations across the board. From sweeping mines to intelligence sharing, and from protecting energy infrastructure to running joint military patrols, the Turkish-led coalition is boxing the Russian fleet into a corner. The geopolitical consequences for Putin are nothing short of catastrophic. Russia's capacity to project power beyond its borders is facing total collapse. For years, Moscow had been using the Black Sea as a vital, irreplaceable logistics highway to resupply its naval base in Tartus, Syria, and to sustain its military operations across the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Now that lifeline is being slowly choked out. It faces agonizing dual-sided pressure. On one side, the strict legal restrictions of the Montreux Convention, and on the other, a massive hostile multinational military presence waiting right at the exit of the Bosporus. And what about Crimea, the crown jewel of Putin's imperial conquests? Its strategic value is evaporating before his very eyes. When Russia stole Crimea in 2014, the sole motivation was to secure the naval fortress of Sevastopol for the Black Sea Fleet. But thanks to Turkish-supplied weapons and relentless Ukrainian innovation, that base has become a death trap. A massive portion of the pride of the Russian Navy has already been hunted down, blown apart, and sent to the bottom of the ocean by drones and missiles. The surviving ships, terrified of being destroyed, have been forced to tuck their tails and flee from Crimea, retreating hundreds of miles east to the port of Novorossiysk. Because of this, Crimea is no longer a strategic asset for Russia. It has become a massive, bleeding liability, a vulnerable target that drains Russian resources just to keep it from falling. Meanwhile, a massive transformation is taking place beneath the waves regarding global energy supply security. The Turk Stream pipeline, which runs directly along the bottom of the Black Sea, is Russia's absolute last remaining major corridor for selling its natural gas to Europe. By drastically strengthening its military and security architecture in the Black Sea, Turkey has effectively placed its hand directly around the valve of Russia's economic lifeline. When Putin seeks to weaponize his energy supplies, as he loves to do, he will no longer be dealing with a fractured, fearful Europe. He will be staring down a heavily armed, highly organized, and resolute Ankara that controls the very waters his gas flows through. But the most critical, agonizing reality for the Kremlin is the state of their once feared naval forces. Russia's Black Sea Fleet is a shadow of its former self. It has sustained humiliating, irreplaceable losses in the war. More than a third of the entire fleet's combat strength has been completely wiped off the map. The mighty flagship, the Moskva, sits at the bottom of the sea. The remaining vessels are trapped, forced into purely defensive, cowardly postures just to survive the week. And exactly as this Russian fleet reaches its absolute weakest point in a century, a brand new, highly advanced multinational military presence is being deployed right at the only exit to the sea to face them. Russia's maneuvering space has not just narrowed, it has practically ceased to exist. To fully appreciate the genius of this trap, American audiences need to understand the ultimate trump card in this entire geopolitical game, the Montreux Convention. Signed in 1936, this treaty is the absolute cornerstone of power in the region. It states that during peacetime, commercial ships can pass freely, but when it comes to warships, Turkey holds the keys to the gate. It imposes strict limits on the tonnage and duration that non-Black Sea warships can stay in the waters. But the real power of Montreux comes into effect during wartime. In the event of a war, the treaty grants Turkey the supreme, unquestionable authority to completely shut down the straits, preventing the warships of warring parties from passing through. The moment the first Russian tank crossed into Ukraine, Ankara did not hesitate. They slammed the heavy iron doors of the straits completely shut. They exercised their sovereign authority and locked down warship transit. This single monumental decision doomed the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Suddenly, the mighty Russian warships sitting in the Mediterranean Sea could not sail north to reinforce their comrades. And the heavily damaged Russian ships limping back from battle in the Black Sea could not sail south to the Mediterranean for critical repairs. The Russian fleet was instantly geographically isolated, trapped inside a shooting gallery, highly exposed and deeply vulnerable to relentless Ukrainian missile attacks. Now take that devastating reality and add the new multinational naval command in Beykoz into the equation. Right at the very exit of the straits, directly suspended over Russia's absolute last lifeline to the global ocean, there is now an organized, heavily armed, Western-aligned military presence. From the perspective of the Russian High Command, the Straits of Istanbul are no longer just a geographical transit point. They have been weaponized into a strategic choke point aimed squarely at the throat of the Russian military. And this is where a specific terrifying detail comes into play that has truly unsettled the highest ranks of the Russian government. A piece of information was quietly revealed by the Turkish Ministry of Defense that shifted the entire global perspective. The commander of the multinational force Ukraine Operational Headquarters, a French lieutenant general named Jean-Pierre Fogg, along with his deputy commander, British Lieutenant General Richard Stuart Charles Bell, personally traveled to Istanbul to inspect the new command post in Beykoz. Let that sink in. High-ranking military commanders from two of the most powerful nuclear-armed members of the NATO alliance casually making an appearance right at the geographic gateway to Russia's backyard. Now, diplomatically, Turkey maintains a very specific stance. They emphasize that technically, on paper, this structure is not officially a NATO headquarters. Technically, legally, they are correct, but geopolitical reality is never limited to the fine print of technical definitions. The raw, undeniable fact that elite military commanders from France and the United Kingdom are inspecting this command post sends a deafening message. It proves that there is massive, highly integrated NATO coordination operating right behind the curtain of this facility. Russia knows exactly what this means. Historically, Moscow has operated on deep-seated paranoia, characterizing any Western initiative near its borders as a plot to encircle and destroy Russia. Initially, the Russian embassy in Turkey tried to play it cool. They refrained from directly criticizing the move and issued weak, carefully worded statements about appreciating Ankara's balanced implementation of the Montreux Convention. But this thin veil of diplomatic subtlety does absolutely nothing to hide Moscow's profound existential strategic unease. The Kremlin is furious, but their hands are tied. They can issue all the diplomatic protests they want. They can run their tired, predictable military exercises, but their actual leverage to change the reality on the ground is exponentially weaker today than it has ever been in modern history. To really understand how we got to this incredible moment, we have to take a step back and look at the breathtaking tightrope walk that Turkey has been performing for the last decade. For years, Ankara has been pursuing one of the most complex, high-stakes balancing acts in the world with Moscow. It confused many in the West. Turkey, a NATO member, bought the advanced S-400 air defense system from Russia. They built the massive Turkstream natural gas pipeline. They contracted Russia to build the enormous Akuyu nuclear power plant on Turkish soil. Their economies were deeply intertwined with billions of dollars in tourism and trade. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has been one of Turkey's largest and most vital natural gas suppliers. They even established complex military coordination through the Astana process in the bloody civil war of Syria, while simultaneously engaging in fierce proxy wars against each other in the battlefields of the Caucasus and the deserts of Libya. But beneath all of this surface-level pragmatic cooperation, beneath the handshakes and the trade deals, lies a deep, bitter, and bloody rivalry that has persisted for literal centuries. The history between the Turks and the Russians is written in blood. The brutal Ottoman-Russian wars, the devastating Crimean War. For hundreds of years, Russian emperors have looked south with a singular burning ambition to conquer the straits and take Istanbul. Make no mistake, Turkey and Russia are not friends. They are historical, age-old rivals, locked in an endless struggle for supremacy. Even the Montreux Convention itself is nothing more than a diplomatic ceasefire, a product of this centuries-long struggle for control. But by the time the Ukraine war entered its grinding later stages, the master strategists in Ankara had run the numbers. They calculated that maintaining this delicate, friendly balance with Moscow was no longer strategically viable or necessary. Russia was bleeding out in the mud of Ukraine. As the Russian military machine faltered, a massive security vacuum began to open up in the Black Sea. The reality of geopolitics is simple. Vacuums do not stay empty. Either Turkey was going to step up and fill that vacuum, projecting its own power, or other external powers would rush in to do it for them. Ankara absolutely refused to allow anyone else to dictate the security of their backyard. By establishing a naval command right in Istanbul, by providing massive, relentless, and highly advanced military support directly to the Ukrainian armed forces, and by declaring loudly at the highest possible levels that the Crimean Peninsula legally belongs to Ukraine, Turkey has made its choice. The sum of all these bold, aggressive moves points in one undeniable direction. Turkey has definitively aligned itself with the Western security architecture in the Black Sea, and it is doing the heavy lifting to keep Russia contained. And this alignment is not just political rhetoric. It is backed by hard, lethal steel that produces horrific, tangible results for the Russian military on the ground. Let's talk about the Bayraktar TB2 unmanned aerial vehicles again. Produced by the Turkish defense company Baykar Makina, these drones have cemented their legacy as one of the defining weapons that permanently altered the trajectory of the 21st century. Since 2019, well before the massive invasion, dozens of TB2s were quietly delivered to Ukraine. As the war escalated, massive new shipments arrived, pushing the total number far beyond 50 units. When the invasion began, the Russian military thought they would parade into Kiev in 3 days. Instead, their massive armored columns, their advanced air defense batteries, and their critical fuel logistics lines were utterly pulverized by unseen Turkish drones striking from the clouds. The footage of Russian tanks being vaporized by Turkish munitions became the defining image of Ukrainian resistance. But Turkey did not stop at drones. They flooded the zone with Kirpi heavily armored troop carriers, keeping Ukrainian infantry alive under heavy fire. They provided highly advanced laser-guided munitions, devastating heavy machine guns, sophisticated electronic warfare suites to jam Russian communications, and massive amounts of vital protective gear. But if you want to know what truly terrifies Russian military planners, look at what Baykar is doing right now. They are not just shipping weapons. They are executing a massive, long-term strategic masterstroke. Baykar has launched a massive project, currently under construction, to build a colossal drone production facility directly inside the borders of Ukraine. This massive factory, which broke ground in 2024, will have the capacity to churn out a staggering 120 advanced combat drones every single year. This is not just emergency wartime charity. This is the permanent integration of the Turkish and Ukrainian defense industries. This is the creation of a massive, unstoppable military-industrial complex right on Russia's border.
Think about the implications. Even when this war eventually ends, the weapons factory will still be there. It will continue to produce, continue to innovate, and this deadly strategic partnership will only continue to deepen. The strategic irony of this situation is absolutely staggering. The exact same country that is producing the advanced weapons currently dismantling the Russian Black Sea fleet piece by piece is now simultaneously taking absolute control of the security architecture of the very sea where that terrified, battered Russian fleet is currently hiding. No matter how many times the generals in Moscow analyze this brutal equation, the mathematical outcome remains exactly the same. Turkey has masterfully positioned itself as both the supplier of the sword and the master of the sea. From an American perspective, from the perspective of global NATO strategy, this is an incredibly powerful, unbelievably advantageous geopolitical reality. But incredibly, we have not even reached the most critical game-changing part of this story yet, because what we are about to discuss is a monumental military development that completely transcends the Black Sea. This is a move that is going to fundamentally reshape the entire southern flank of the NATO alliance for the next 50 years. Because it is not just about a naval command in Istanbul. Turkey is currently weaving a massive, multi-layered, impenetrable security network across the entire region. In July of 2024, Turkey, operating alongside Romania and Bulgaria, officially activated the Black Sea Mine Countermeasures Task Group. This heavily armed, highly coordinated naval task force is aggressively sweeping the waters to neutralize the severe threat posed by drifting Russian sea mines and to provide a steel shield of protection for critical, multi-billion-dollar underwater infrastructure. The command of this vital task force rotates among the three nations every 6 months, creating a seamless, highly integrated maritime defense network. In light of this massive naval buildup, Turkey took an unprecedented step to flex its sovereign muscle. Ankara announced to the world that the formidable Turkish Navy will now directly escort Turkish commercial oil tankers as they transit through the Black Sea. This aggressive military posture was adopted immediately following mysterious drone attacks on commercial vessels. Let me be clear about what this means. When a nation deploys highly advanced, heavily armed naval warships to escort civilian commercial ships through open waters, it is the absolute clearest, undeniable declaration that de facto conditions of war exist in that region, and that Turkey is willing to open fire to protect its assets. When you take all of these massive, aggressive steps and look at them from a satellite view, the picture is breathtaking. Turkey is rapidly constructing a highly coordinated, permanent, heavily armed, and multi-dimensional security fortress in the Black Sea. But the grand strategy of Ankara does not stop at the water's edge, and this next development is why military planners in Washington are paying very close attention.
The Turkish Ministry of National Defense recently confirmed a massive, monumental development. A brand new permanent, highly integrated multinational NATO core headquarters is going to be established right in the heart of Turkey. This massive military structure, officially designated as MNC Turar, is going to be permanently stationed in the southern city of Adana. It is slated to be fully operational and completely combat ready by 2028, and it will operate under the direct command of a high-ranking Turkish general. The battle-hardened 6th Corps Command in Adana has been selected to take on this massive mission, and national military personnel have already been heavily assigned to begin the transition. To understand why this is a massive geopolitical earthquake, you have to look at the map of NATO. For years, this has been the missing piece of the puzzle. This move fills an incredibly dangerous, glaring gap in the defense architecture of the Western Alliance. Currently, NATO has 8 massive, heavily armed multinational combat groups stretching in a massive defensive wall all the way from Estonia in the north down to Bulgaria, forming a shield against Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. The massive headquarters in Poland covers the northern flank. The headquarters in Romania covers the eastern flank and the immediate Black Sea coast. But look to the south. For decades, there was no massive permanent NATO corps stationed in Turkey's incredibly critical geography. This is the vital crossroads of the Earth. This is the landmass that directly borders the volatile Middle East. It opens up into the incredibly complex Caucasus region. It dominates the Eastern Mediterranean, and it serves as the ultimate gateway to North Africa. Retired military officials and geopolitical experts have summarized this massive strategic vulnerability perfectly. Without a permanent force in the south, NATO was leaving its underbelly exposed. Now, with a massive multinational corps permanently based in Adana, the NATO alliance will finally have an immovable, heavily fortified command center, specifically designed to protect Turkey, and by extension Europe, against the relentless threats originating from Russia, as well as the deep instability radiating from the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Now, some might point out that NATO already has a rapid deployment corps in Istanbul, but that is missing the point. The Rapid Deployment Force is designed for quick, emergency, short-term interventions. It is not designed to provide a permanent, unbreakable wall of regional protection. The new MNC Tur in Adana is an entirely different beast. It is a massive, permanent, highly planned command and control juggernaut. It is designed to facilitate the rapid, seamless integration of tens of thousands of allied forces in the event of a massive regional war. It perfectly aligns with NATO's Grand Southern Regional Defense Plan, which officially covers the entire Mediterranean, the South Caucasus, the Black Sea, and North Africa. This massive defensive doctrine was intensely shaped during the NATO summit in Vilnius in 2023, and it was locked in stone in Washington, D.C. in 2024. Military analysts from the top think tanks across Europe are looking at this development and calling it the ultimate realization of NATO's 360-degree defense policy. It is a monumental victory for Western security and an absolute masterstroke for Turkey's geopolitical standing. Furthermore, the selection of Adana is a stroke of logistical genius. Adana is home to the legendary Incirlik Air Base, a massive, heavily fortified installation where thousands of United States military troops are permanently stationed and where a portion of America's forward deployed nuclear deterrent is housed. The Turkish 6th Corps, which is taking on this new NATO mission, already has decades of deep operational experience working shoulder to shoulder with American military forces and Spanish missile defense units. They are the single most prepared combat-ready unit for this new global mission. Because Adana already possesses world-class military housing, elite healthcare facilities, and massive logistical infrastructure, the NATO Corps can be spun up incredibly quickly, elevating the city's strategic importance to a level it has never seen before. Every single one of these massive, earth-shattering developments is rapidly unfolding as we march toward the absolutely critical NATO summit, where the leaders of the free world will gather in Ankara. Turkey is not just hosting a meeting, they are unveiling a new world order in their region. Turkey has heavily supported the alliance's largest military exercises with totally unprecedented troop participation. They are actively launching fighter jets to participate in the critical protection of Baltic airspace against Russian incursions. They have single-handedly established a massive strangling naval command to lock down the Black Sea. and they are currently building an impenetrable NATO core fortress in the south to guard the Middle Eastern gateway. What Ankara is doing is fundamentally redefining the exact center of gravity within the entire NATO alliance. And in executing this brilliant, aggressive grand strategy, Turkey is accomplishing two massive goals simultaneously. They are fiercely safeguarding their own sovereign regional interests and protecting their borders, while simultaneously becoming the absolute most critical, irreplaceable, load-bearing pillar of the entire Western Alliance's global security vision. Now, take a step back and look at the magnificent, sweeping big picture of what has just happened on the global stage. A highly advanced multinational naval command is now fully operational in Istanbul, pointing its weapons north. A massive, permanent, heavily fortified NATO core headquarters is being rapidly constructed in Adana, locking down the south. Heavily armed Turkish warships have begun directly escorting civilian energy fleets, daring anyone to take a shot. A highly organized mine countermeasures task force is aggressively sweeping the waters, and the flow of devastating military hardware and deep diplomatic support for the Ukrainian military is accelerating day by agonizing day. Deep inside the walls of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin may desperately want to continue viewing the Black Sea as his own personal, private Russian lake. He may desperately cling to the imperial dreams of the czars, but the brutal, unforgiving reality of modern geopolitics has completely passed him by. The Montreux Convention remains Ankara's impenetrable legal and military shield, and standing resolutely behind that massive shield is a newly forged, highly motivated multinational military alliance, an organized, heavily armed naval command, and a massive, sprawling defense architecture that totally encompasses the entire southern flank of the European continent. Vladimir Putin is going to hate every single second of this. He is going to watch in agonizing frustration as his historic imperial ambitions are dismantled piece by piece. But the brutal truth that Moscow must now swallow is that there is absolutely nothing left for him to do about it. The historic centuries-old balance of power in the Black Sea has not just shifted, it has been violently, permanently overturned. And standing right at the absolute center of this monumental global shift, holding the keys to the straits and the future of the region, is Turkey.